it's amazing, like, to have a conference with my own name in it, and everyone actually like joked about it on Twitter. Is like, is it actually a real thing? It is a real thing. Firstly, it's International Programmers Day. It's the end of the day. We've sat through a lot of great talks. Like, everybody in here is fantastic. We have to remember that programming is not just something we're paid for. It's actually something that a lot of us, some of us, enjoy. And we actually enjoy going to work every day. So, it's really, really important that we do these types of things. So this talk is called It's Time to Rebuild DevOps. Okay? It's a 2-hour talk because there's now 2 hours between the next. I'm kidding. It's only 30 minutes. But it's a story time talk, okay? It's my version, my take on what's happening, what the industry is shifting toward, what it needs to shift toward, because I still believe that we need a shift in what we're actually doing. And if you have any questions, any points, as we go through, they're probably related to a specific point that I'm making. Whack your hand up and we'll talk about it there and then, okay? You don't need to wait for the end for me, because I'm a very interactive person. So about me, I am Stack72 on Twitter, stack72.dev on Blue Sky. I'm a former Terraform engineer, a former Pulumi engineer. I'm a very frustrated infrastructure user, and I've now started working at a company called System Initiative in order to help reposition what is going on in the industry. Quick show of hands, how many people have heard of System Initiative? I expect it to be very low. Wonderful, wonderful. Welcome to a new world. Okay, so DevOps is eating the world. Okay, it's everywhere. Every conference, every company, every tool, it is literally everywhere. It's a phenomenon that has swept our industry in the last 14 to 15 years. And it's a movement that started to bring together our ops teams and our developers teams in order to achieve something. Okay? In 2007, a Belgian man called Patrick Dubois is thinking about his frustration in IT because of the passing back and forward of things happening between departments. Okay? 2008, August, at the Agile conference in Toronto, Andrew Clay Schaefer actually proposed the Birds of a Feather session titled Agile Infrastructure, and only one person attended that talk, literally one person, not even the speaker, Patrick. And in this room, he's like thinking. Later, they talk to each other. They start to talk about lots of things. Skip forward to the Velocity Conference in 2009. Paul Hammond and John Allspaw talked about Flickr and their 10+ deploys a day. And people started going a bit like, hold on, this is a thing. Like, if there's that going on here in North America, why can't we do it? Paul Nazrat repeated on Twitter and said to Patrick, hold your own conference, and thus DevOps Days was born. Okay? If you build it, they will come. This conference is everywhere. Okay? Before the era that historians will refer to as the COVID era, there were 80 such events in 2019. It, of course, scaled down, and it is now starting to scale back up. Okay? This year, there are planned to be 60 DevOps days throughout the world. Okay? That's phenomenal. That is a movement. That is an ecosystem. That is a big community who want to make things better. Okay? But I think that we're just getting started. Okay? DevOps as a phenomenon. Okay? Now, for those who don't know or have their own thoughts on DevOps, the original explanation of DevOps is that it's to bring people to work together to build, release, and securely deliver value as fast as possible. Okay, that's it in a nutshell. You can have your own flavor on top of it, but that's what the original one. Okay, so the DevOps practices enabled software development teams, so devs and ops teams, to accelerate their delivery, and they did it through automation, collaboration, fast feedback, iterative improvement. Okay? Now, the wall of confusion is probably one of the most well-known images about DevOps, because pre-DevOps, you used to have an ops team that sat underneath the stairs and you fed them pizza, and they would deliver software whenever a team actually created a package, and they would actually do something, and it would go out into the world, and the team would continue churning out other pieces of software, and hopefully it worked. Okay? This has since changed. But we did it, right? It's been a massive success. It's been great. We've done everything that we wanted to achieve. No, we absolutely did not. Okay? We're only getting started. We're 14 years into this process, and it's been largely painful for most companies. Okay? Now, there have been multiple trailblazers in the early adopters of DevOps. People like Netflix, people like Etsy, okay? These teams, these companies doing such amazing innovations in the operations and development spaces where they're deploying every single line of change of code to their systems to deliver value, okay? But not everybody is there. There's a lot of fear, there's a lot of worrying. Those companies are inspiring, but it's really painful to do these days. So what's gone wrong? Where have we actually gone wrong in what we do? Because it's certainly not the fault of the original vision of DevOps. Okay? We still want to be able to collaborate. We still want to be able to deliver software faster, better, more securely for people. We, the practitioners, we, the organizations, we are the ones who have made this more difficult for ourselves than we really should have. The first, I'll step back. For me, there's three main areas that we have gone wrong. Okay, three main areas that we really may have caused ourselves more pain than we actually need to. First one is the collaboration part. Okay, now some of the things I will say here go against what some of the other speakers have said today. Okay, that is not because they're wrong. This is my individual belief. And this is just my pain point more than anything else, okay? Collaboration via GitHub has been one of the worst ways that we have failed in DevOps, okay? Now, I actually found this image. This person was making a single line change to a Terraform file, and it had 1,170 hidden comments, okay? The GitHub thread had scrolled so much that it was just collapsing them left, right, and center. Okay? Now, pull requests to me are the worst. The reason that they're worse is whether we like it or not, ego gets in the way of a pull request. We nitpick. We point out things like comments should be different. We point out naming convention changes. We point out spelling mistakes. We don't look at the functionality or the outcome that we wanted to achieve. We look directly at the code itself, not what it actually wants to do. Now, for me, that's very difficult, okay? Because how I write code is going to be different, I can guarantee you, to every other person in this room. No two people in this room write code the same. That's what makes this ecosystem fantastic. That's what makes software fantastic, okay? Because if we were all robots, then there wouldn't be a need for what we do, okay? Now, maybe ChatGPT or AI will actually do that. Who knows? I'm going to keep milking it until it's not the case. But whose job is it to look at a pull request? Is it a senior engineer? Is it a junior engineer? Is it an architect? Like, do I tag somebody on a pull request if they don't look at it after maybe an hour, 2 hours a day? What about which PR needs to be reviewed first? Pull requests are awful. They're not a mechanism for collaboration and communication. If you do it, it's very, very, very difficult to get changes through a system fast. The source of truth. Jesus, where do I start? As a person who worked mostly using GitHub for my infrastructure as code, my source of truth was GitHub as my infrastructure as code. Okay? Now, that is not always the way it is. Okay? We are humans. Humans are nosy. Humans like to take their little hands and put it on things where maybe they shouldn't do it. For example, they log into an AWS console or a GCP console or an Azure console, and they realize that I know what's wrong here. I'll just make this change in the AWS console just to this little thing, and it'll be okay, and it'll fix this bug in production. Okay? If you do that, your GitHub repository is no longer your source of truth. Okay? You are basing any code decisions that you make on something that is not correct. Okay? An environmental change can have drastic effects on what is going on. Has anyone ever ran a Terraform plan or a Pulumi preview and it tells you that it's all looking great, and when you run the apply, it goes, I can't do anything. So firstly, I must apologize because I probably created some of those bugs working on these tools, but it's really, and it causes real pain and real frustration. So let's think of this scenario. I start working on Monday morning. I work based out of the UK. The rest of my team based out of San Francisco. I get on with my day's work. I open a pull request. That pull request has to go through review. And of course, by the time time zones come into account, the pull request probably isn't looked at until very late Monday night, my time, maybe even very early Tuesday morning, my time. I go to bed, because I sometimes have to sleep, but there's a production outage, and somebody in the San Francisco team has to make an emergency change to the Terraform or the Pulumi or the CloudFormation or whatever configuration, and that is no longer reflected in my pull request. But my pull request was based on an artifact that was at a point in time. Really, really, really difficult to do this. It's all too common. We all fall into the same mistakes. You do get these style of issues. It's not just Terraform. Pulumi also has the same issue where somebody has deleted a resource in AWS, the code hasn't been updated, and Pulumi goes to apply it, and it just fails. It's not the fault of the tool. The tool is reflecting of what it's in its state. So it is a big problem. And of course, we have opportunity. Now, 14 years ago when DevOps started, people saw a lot of dollar signs in their eyes. Because with every great boom in IT, becomes a great boom in tools. There is money to be made. This is what we are in it for. Okay, not a person in here does it for the love. Okay, now, of course you may love what you do, but you love getting paid. I certainly do. So this ecosystem has exploded. Now, if we think of this as some of the tools in here are layers of abstraction upon cloud providers or SaaS tools or different things, and we end up, every time we use them or use a new tool, we fall into what's called a 200% problem. Not only do we have to understand that layer of abstraction, but we also have to learn that tool. Okay? We are making life very difficult for ourselves. I had a conversation with somebody yesterday over dinner who just wanted to deploy an application to the cloud. Okay? This person used to use Heroku. RIP Heroku. Okay, well, it's not dead, of course, but it's not as common as it used to be. And this person was like, so what I did is I spun up an infrastructure as code tool. I needed to do something. I deployed a server. I deployed an application onto a server. And then I had this fucking Route 53. I'd never used Route 53 before because Heroku did all that for me before. And they were talking through all of these scenarios and these conundrums. Question for the audience. If I were to ask you how to deploy a container to the cloud, somebody give me an idea how they would do it. Anybody? Where would you start? Which tool would you choose? Which provider would you choose? Which cloud would you choose? Would you use which container orchestration engine would you choose? All of these questions have to be answered before we even get started, right? Do we use K3S? Do we use Kubernetes? Do we use ECS? Do we use Google Container Engine? Do we use all these things? It's hard. It's really hard to do what we do. And we're making it harder for ourselves. We got things wrong. The original definition of DevOps said we should put people before process and tools. Have we done that? No. We have done tools and processes now before people. Okay? We automate things to the nth degree. We probably automate stuff that we maybe not even worthwhile automating. I used to be one of those people who's like, automate everything. I am like, maybe. DevOps has done us a lot of favors. DevOps brought down initial silos. But I think with the tools, the process, and everything that's been introduced into this industry at this point in time, we've actually created different silos. We've created complexity for getting started. We've created complexity when we need to review pull requests. Who is the person who needs to review my Terraform pull request if two of the developers have never used Terraform before? Is it useful for them to read the Terraform code? Not really. We've created all of this pain ourselves. And we've ended up that we've got infrastructure that looks like this. Okay? And how would we change just this part right here? Like just this one. I know you've seen this meme in hundreds of different scenarios, and it's probably one that says this is a library held up by a person written in Nebraska and stuff. But like, how would we change that, just that one piece? Very difficult. Not only that, anytime we try and change something that far down our stack, we end up in a situation of risk. We start to split up our infrastructure files. We start to create modules everywhere. We create layer upon layer upon layer upon layer upon layer of different layers of abstraction. Because we're great, right? We're developers and operators, and we love abstraction. Abstraction solves a lot of things. Like, I was always told as a developer, put interfaces in front of my database because I may want to swap out a database someday. I've never once swapped a database out. So abstraction maybe is not always great. So we end up with death by 1,000 paper cuts. We end up that it's probably parts of our system that we've never touched. Like, we know that it's so nasty in there, we just pretend that it doesn't exist. And it's all too common. I haven't even talked about security, okay? Because those people have been left out way out in the Netherlands, not actually the Netherlands, like way out of like left field, where they had to even create their own part of the ecosystem called DevSecOps. Like, they weren't even included in the original DevOps. They actually were, of course, because people took it literally that it was dev and ops, but they actually, of course, were, because it was about collaboration. But it's really at the case of, we've created all of these different layers, not even within our tools, but even within our organizations. Anyone heard of Conway's Law? Yeah. Conway's Law says that, the complexity of our organization is reflected in the complexity of our code, our tools, our development, everything. And that's exactly what's happening here. So what's next? Which way do we go? Because we can't continue down this path. We can't continue adding more and more and more tools and more DSLs and more flavors of abstraction and more paid. And like, teams are going to have to infinitely scale to manage all of this complexity and do all of these things, right? Like, we're at Scrooge McDuck time money, right? We're at this point now where something has to come along and completely change what we're trying to do. And we're at that point where we at System Initiative say it's the coming of the second wave of DevOps. Okay, now, a disclaimer, a couple of disclaimers. One, I am not a salesperson, okay? I would be the worst salesperson in the world. Number two, everything I'm going to show you here is open source, free, actually free. There's no bait and switch involved. But it's not that I'm trying to sell you on a tool. I'm trying to show you that there are different things available, that there are people trying to rethink how things work and change how things happen. And three, okay, you are going to see a GUI, okay? Don't be afraid of the GUI, okay? The reason that we've always been told we don't use with GUI tools. It's okay. It's okay. It's 2023. Maybe we're at the point where we can think about using a GUI. Hands up who, when they create their infrastructure or when they start a software development project, they draw boxes on paper. We are humans. Humans think visually. The fact that we think visually means that if we had a visual style tool, then maybe it would be very good for collaboration. So this is the system initiative tool. Okay. Now you will see on the screen, you will see boxes and you will see edges. So nodes and edges. Okay, it is a graph. Okay, each of those nodes and edges are connected by what is called a function. So system initiative is a hypergraph of functions that when you change something, it replays the functions the whole way down the tree to understand the cascading effects. Okay, I told you earlier that if I opened the pull request on Monday, and come Tuesday, if the code no longer reflected what was in my pull request, when I tried to deploy it, maybe it would be painful. Okay, that is because most tooling to this point has been unidirectional. The fact that it has been unidirectional means that we only push it one way and we don't account for changes that happen in the other side. In System Initiative, we do. This is not a diagram, by the way. This is a live representation. So this is like live against my AWS infrastructure, and if I click something like that, you will see that it says there is no JSON representation for that AMI. I have a look at the next one down where it actually says there's no image ID, it's a required field. There's no EC2 region set. I have a look and I can start to say, okay, so let's add some stuff. So the first thing we want to do is we'll add an image ID. So I go to the AMI because AMI is connected to EC2 instance. And in my AMI, I add my image ID, which is this one. And what you will see is it is testing the function. Okay? It is making a live request to EC2 to figure out if that is actually in place and working as expected. Now, I can go the whole way down the graph. And I can say, for next thing I need to know, now notice, it has passed that image ID into the EC2 instance because they are connected via functions. And if I change it at the AMI layer, it passes that value down. It's a hypergraph. If I go and I search for a T3 micro, and again, you'll see that I can actually make a request to check and see if it's an EC2 micro. And I can lastly see that everything is inside a region. Okay? Now, inside the region, I know that if I change a region in Terraform or change a region in Pulumi, then it'll effectively tell you that it has to do everything again, right? Let's try and see what System Initiative does here. Let's change the region. Let's make it EC2 instance. And what it's going to do right now is it's going to calculate the scope, and it's going to tell you it's going to change all 6 resources because those functions are all being replayed to understand the changes that get passed down. Okay? And it's doing live requests. In fact, I can show you the styles of live requests that it's doing in the fact of if I have a look at an EC2 instance, and if I have a look at a qualification, what it's doing, it's making an AWS EC2 run instances dry run request. So it is testing that it continually can make the infrastructure, and it's doing that check against the cloud to make sure that nothing has changed in the cloud before it needs to. Because we have what's called a refresh func in here, and that refresh func happens on every time that it needs to be. And you can see that it does the describe, and it actually checks the error conditions. It's full fidelity, okay? Have you ever waited on another infrastructure as code tool for a new feature or a new resource? You don't need to do it here, right? You control it. Why defer the capabilities to a third party? Why not just go in and actually say, you know what, let's create a new asset. Let's actually say const my prop equals new prop builder dot set name. I can't see here because it's down here, not here, but that's all right. And it'll be stackconf, and we'll set kind, and that's a string, and we'll build it. And then lastly, we'll say asset.add prop. Try to code on a different screen is interesting. If only there was a collaboration tool for this. And let's run create asset. New asset is created. It is called new asset 3098. Of course, don't call your assets that. You know what I mean? Just call it something more interesting. And now if I go back to the original screen and I have a look here, there is new asset 3098. And there should be a prop called stackconf. Okay, you have full fidelity. It doesn't matter. We don't want to be creating these layers of pain, these layers of abstraction. We want to be able to control things ourselves. Okay, let's think of advanced workflow scenarios where green blue deploys. Okay, where you probably have to run your tool once to take something out of the load balancer, run it a second time to add a new one in, run it a third time to take the new one out, or change the numbers of auto-scaling groups, etc. You shouldn't need to do that, right? Because there's CLI tools that can do this for you. Just shell out to the CLI or just make a HTTP request. So it's not about the tool. The tool doesn't matter. The tool is just a way of understanding that there are different ways to make your life easier. Okay, you don't need to bring 25 different tools together. If you have 25 different CLIs, you can wrap them up inside this style of tool and actually go and deploy them that way. It doesn't matter. You saw my EC2 is just making shell out requests. Okay? Now I can show you more about this because I'm not going to dribble on for the rest of the talk because I have a couple of things left to say. But you can come and see more. You have a full change log on the proposed changes. You can actually delete changes. Actually, I don't want that change. I don't want to create the security group. I don't want to create the EC2 instance this time. And then lastly, of course, and the most interesting thing is it's change sets. Okay? Everything is a change set. So the fact that it's a change set means it will never be deployed to the real world until you merge that change sets ahead. What happens if my version of the infrastructure is different from somebody else's? What happens if I don't want my infrastructure to look like this? Well, what I do is I click this little button right here, and I create a new change set, and I start building my infrastructure in my way, and that's the equivalent of my pull request. Okay? It's multiplayer. Different people can be watching. Anyone ever used Figma or Miro or any of these styles of tools? It's a similar project. Okay? It's like a dashboard that multiple people can be on at the same time and see what's going on. Same thing. Same style of thing. Okay? Don't be afraid of the GUI. It's no problem. So, remember, DevOps was designed to focus on delivery of systems. Okay? The second wave of DevOps is our second wave of DevOps, what we're trying to push forward is trying to facilitate that communication. We're trying to understand the real-time implication of our changes, and we want to be infinitely extensible. Okay? I don't want to have to wait for a release of one cloud provider to push a new SDK so another tool provider can update their tool, make a release, and then I have to ingest that. That to me is crazy. Now, I'm part of the problem because I was in those ecosystems and I proposed and pushed and did a lot of that, but I'm just learning now the pain that it's actually doing for developers on a day-to-day basis, and I want to make amends for that. Until your pretty code is in production making money, you've just wasted your time. Okay, Chris Reed is an amazing person that was part of the continuous delivery movement, worked at ThoughtWorks in the UK, and that I heard this quote a long time ago on Twitter, maybe 2009, and this quote has stuck with me everywhere. Okay, because I was one of those people who polished code and was worried about pushing it into production and was not unlocking the value for the users faster. Now, for me, it's all about unlocking that value sooner and iterating on that value. And it's really important to say, no matter what you read, sorry, platform engineering, DevOps is not dead. Our aspirations were correct. We just need to iterate a bit more. We have to it's software. We never get it right in the first time. Thank you so much. You can find me stack72@systemminute.com. You can find me on Twitter. If you have any comments, please shout out now, or you can talk to me at the end.
All right, please don't just shout them out. I have a microphone here. So if you have comments and questions, now would be a great time.
I love interaction. Come on. Ask some questions.
Hi, my name is Anton. Thank you for the GUI. I didn't understand the idea behind the tool. Does it generate Terraform?
Oh, wonderful question. Thank you. Sorry, I should have made that. No, this tool does not generate any Terraform, Pulumi, CDK, CloudFormation, nothing. It is using the raw APIs of the clouds themselves. We are trying to reduce that 200% problem to be that if you want to use the cloud, you use the cloud. You don't need to know how to write in X language or YDSL. You have a component that represents your digital twin in the real world. You drag that onto the screen, and that then represents a simulation that can get deployed into the real world. Okay, and it's using, so in the case that I showed you today, the AWS instances, it's actually using the AWS CLI. Okay, now it can use a HTTP API. If you really wanted to, you could probably drive Terraform or Pulumi or any of these different things. It doesn't matter to us. Okay, our tool is a visual tool that allows you to drive simulations, and what you do, where you deploy those simulations, what the real world is entirely your decision.
Got it. Thanks.
Thanks, Paul. What kind of like production-ready state does it have? I think we talked about it first, like January this year,
Yeah.
and this was a pretty early demo I saw at the time, and I really liked it. So what do you think about like using this in production?
So we say no at this moment in time. Absolutely no.
Okay.
Okay. So there's a couple of reasons for this, and we're very clear about that. One, our early audience, because this is like a new concept for a lot of people, is about builders, people who want to come in, help shape the product, help drive things forward. Okay. But there's three key things that we want to finish before we put this in like a more production ready. Okay. They're all being worked on, and it's all open source. So one, it's currently all stored in Postgres. Okay. And if you want to run this on your machine, you probably need about 16 gig of RAM to run a Postgres server. Right, because we haven't done any fine-tuning at all. But it's being ripped out, it's being changed into everything actually being a DAG. Okay, so each change set as a DAG means it's mutable, immutable, and it means it can't be changed because it's a point-in-time reflection, and then you can be able to walk the DAG because there are, I showed you assets. Assets is like the structure of what's going to be deployed, like an EC2 is an asset, or an S3 bucket is an asset, and you have functionality attached to those assets, okay? Now, the functionality is always going to change, okay? The asset is always going to change as the cloud changes, and probably people have been in the situation where you have one version of a resource and the new tool changes that version of a resource, and then you're in this potentially breaking state area and you have to do like state migrations. We're building like a rebase functionality into the assets so that we'll understand the heritage of where it's come from, what changes, and they can be replayed safely across the top. Okay, so that's number one. Number two.
What is a DAG?
A directed acyclic graph. So like graph theory, like nodes and edges.
So you replaced the database now?
Yes, with some
for the first time.
Yes, like it's pretty much gone. Okay. Secondly, we're building an import and export functionality for your workspaces because we know that like people want to get started locally, maybe push it into a dev server so that other people in the team, you have to be able to push things through the system. And then lastly, and it's one of the most important features of the lot, actually two more. One of the most important for me is secret management, okay? Because we are bad at secret management in our ecosystem, in our industry. Okay, we're really bad. Like, we're really bad. So we're actually creating the ability to attach secret functions, like pre-flight functions, into the assets so that you can overwrite like different areas of the graph and say this one needs to use this secret from Vault, or this one needs to use this secret from CLI credentials, or so on and so forth. And then the last one, which I actually just finished last night late, is the ability to attach arbitrary functions, okay? Now, in infrastructure as code tools, you create a desired state, and the tool takes it to that state, okay? Now, I can't remember, I think it was Hila mentioned earlier, Rundeck. Okay, so tools like Rundeck, you can actually tell it to do arbitrary behavior or functions and like run arbitrary commands and jobs. We're building a similar functionality in here, right? Because we have a graph, and we have a graph of resources, and we know that this auto-scaling group has 10 EC2 instances in the background, and we know we have to replace those instances because of a security concern or something like that. Wouldn't it be great to just attach a command that says, roll over each instance, take it out of the load balancer, reboot it, put it back in the load balancer, and you could just attach that based functionality to what we're actually doing. So now you can attach EC2 start, stop, reboot, create X ticket, add to load balancer, all of these different pieces of functionality. So when these 4 pieces of functionality that we're working on are finished, we believe it's in a much more production-ready state. And of course, you can take it and try it and play with it. It's open source, it's free, you can run it locally, you don't need to pay for it. It's like one of those things, and of course you can make any changes you want to yourself. So.
Thank you.
Any last questions? We have 1 hour and 25 minutes. I'm kidding. Awesome. Thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure to come back to Germany and speak at stackconf, my own conference. I will definitely be looking out if people want to talk more about it. Drop me an email. Always happy to jump on a Zoom or a Google Hangout and just talk more about it and see how it goes. But enjoy the rest of the conference. I really appreciate it.